Citizens' Rights Conference is linked to the elections. Besides the fact that half of the globe is going to vote potentially in elections in 2024, we have also our European elections in June. So therefore, we really do hope that we can have a meaningful discussion about how we can foster citizen participation in elections in a way in which this can lead to a stronger democracy that works for all, not only for the mainstream representatives of society, but also for underrepresented groups. So this is the way also in which we have organized our conference today and the panels. In a minute, we are going to watch the video address of the Vice President of the Commission, Ms. Switzer. It became evident last week that she needed to attend at the time of the conference an interinstitutional meeting, but she was nice to record really a tailored video message for us. So we are going to watch it. Then we will hear from my colleagues, Elisa and Savannah, working in our European democracy focus area, about the outcomes of an interesting exercise that we have implemented last year called the European Dystopia. What we did was that we asked citizens to share with us which are their worst nightmares in terms of negative outcomes of the European elections this year, the dystopian, then to share with us what they think we need to do in order to prevent this worst case scenario from taking place, as well as to make personal pledges of what they as individual citizens are committing to do in order to make sure we end up after the elections with better democracy that we have now. So all of those trends will be presented to you by our colleagues. Claire Morancier, who is the primary organizer of this conference, is going then to present the trends of our citizenship awards. This year, the winner will become a secret till the end of the conference when the president of our board of directors, Jean, is going to present who will win the award for the best idea of how to foster citizen participation in elections. Meanwhile, we are going to have two panels. The first will focus on ways to engage underrepresented groups in political life of the Union, and the second will put a special emphasis and zoom in youth participation. We know that there is a number of countries who have lowered their voting age this year, so we'll have more young citizens potentially going to the polls, and we need to see how actually we can make sure that they exercise their voting rights. I will stop now here and let's really watch the video and the welcoming address of Vice President Switzer.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure as European Commission Vice President for Democracy and Demography to speak to you today. I had hoped to join you in person because your event is an opportunity to take stock of citizens' rights in the European Union. I have a very clear message to share with you. Democracy thrives on the ability of citizens to contribute and participate in their democracy at all levels of governance. Voting in elections is the main way for citizens to participate in their democracy. But I ask the question, is this enough? We must remember the dynamic space that exists between elections. That is the space where citizens of all generations can come together to discuss their hopes and dreams for the future. A place for citizens to increase their trust in politicians, a place for politicians to trust citizens, and a place for civil society organizations too. I'm always looking for partners like you to complement my work on defending citizens' rights and ensuring that our democracy is fit for the future, fit for all generations, particularly in view of the upcoming European elections. I believe that European elections will be fought and won on the issue of trust and the ability to show that democracy can still deliver what is needed and where it is needed. We must provide an alternative to the easy and empty promises of populism. I, myself, I was not born in democracy. So I'm very much aware of not taking democracy for granted. The threats and challenges to democracy are not just coming from outside our own borders, they exist also within. We must counteract political alienation with greater political participation and institutional listening. We need a strengthening of other kinds of democratic practices beyond voting. We must nurture the dynamic space that exists between elections. Our work in the European Commission is part of building an innovative democratic ecosystem. When I was first appointed as European Commission Vice President, I said that politics was no longer business as usual. A new push for democracy is needed. This is a work in progress and always will be, and always it will be, because democracy itself is a dynamic concept. It's not static. Therefore, the democratic institutions that underpin democracy must also evolve. The European Commission works to connect all parts of the democratic ecosystem, both on and offline. So I do appreciate your focus on fostering political participation and shaping a stronger democracy that leaves no one behind. This links to my work during the Conference on the Future of Europe. I regularly ask the various stakeholders I meet if they have truly grasped the opportunity of the conference provided. Citizens deliberated and delivered 49 concrete proposals. The European Commission followed up with a firm commitment to embed citizens' engagement. Our Commission work programs for last year and for this year respond to the proposals. On the 6th of December last year, as another follow-up to the conference, the Commission presented the Guide to European Citizenship. It equips citizens with essential information on their rights. European citizen panels are another follow-up to the conference. I see a desire and excitement to engage when I meet the randomly selected citizens, including young people who form 1/3 of the panels. We have an ongoing panel on energy efficiency, and in April, we will launch another on anti-hatred in society. My work on children's rights and the online child participation platform demonstrate that young people are ready to engage on the future of Europe. There is no one person, institution, or organization at any level that is capable of successfully defending democracy by themselves. This is why we have the Defense of Democracy package. The package contains a recommendation aimed at enhancing the participation of citizens and civil society in policymaking across all levels of government and across all generations. I urge you to spread the word about this recommendation so that member states can take it on board and use it at all levels of governance. It is vital that partners pull together at all levels of governance to defend our democracy, to increase trust in our democracy and the democratic institutions designed to serve citizens. This is part of building a democracy fit for the future. Thank you very much.
You can take the call. See that. Is this on? Yeah, I think so.
Is it? Can you hear us?
Yeah, it works. Are the slides on? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, okay. I have the honor of starting this, the first small panel, I would say. This is not really a discussion panel, but today we will just be presenting a bit of the work of ECAS in the recent years, actually, some of the activities of last year. And already last year, we have been implementing certain activities in order to start raising awareness on the European elections. We are an organization trying to defend citizens' rights and also to increment, let's say, political participation. And of course, in our representative democracy, one of the ways to do it is to make sure that people turn out to elections and they also vote in the European elections and not only in their local and national ones.
So just to start off, my name is Elisa. I'm the Program Director for European Democracy at the European Citizen Action Service. And today I'm here with my colleagues Claire, who's the manager of the EU Rights Focus Area, and with Savannah, who's one of our participatory democracy coordinators. And with this, I would like to start introducing to you one of the activities that we had last year, which was called the European Elections Dystopia. So dystopia is already quite intriguing because we came up with this activity just because the European Union and the European institutions are usually asking citizens about their dreams and their hopes and their future for Europe. We've had this question so many times from institutional actors. And this time we just wanted to have some fun and actually mix things around and start off with some sort of creative destruction. So in order to do this, we had a sort of crowdsourcing process. What is crowdsourcing? It's an e-participation mechanism because we were experts also on digital democracy. So we tried to reach out to citizens all over Europe in order to ask them what were their nightmares for the European election. As you can see from this slide, crowdsourcing is simply getting online with people that otherwise you wouldn't know and try to co-create solutions. And in this case, we always do crowdsourcing legislation. So how can citizens actually connect to their policymakers and actually propose certain online solutions to policies? So we have our own crowdsourcing platform, but there are a lot of civic tech companies out there that also have their own platform. We have one in-house, and we actually use this European Elections Dystopia activity, crowdsourcing online, and we also had offline workshops, also with a lot of young people. So today we'll just give you a few of the results that came out of it. So we see crowdsourcing as a new way to complement representative democracy. It's not direct democracy, but it's basically a way for people to participate more through giving ideas to policymakers. And we use this sort of platform in order to get the contributions from citizens. So why did we launch this project? There are, as you can see, 5 main reasons why we actually launched the European Dystopia activity. First of all, obviously, to raise awareness about the elections, because the elections are coming, and we really want especially young people to be out there and to go vote in June. To allow citizens also to reflect a bit on how Europe is and also how they would live without an EU. And this is really important because, as also Vice President Šuica was saying, sometimes democracy is really taken for granted. So how can we make sure that citizens don't take this for granted and they actually reflect on how their life would be without the European Union? The third reason was to improve also the turnout and the outcomes of the elections through better citizen engagement. So making sure that people feel involved and there is a reason for them to be out there to vote for representatives that actually respect EU values. So this was really also an aspect that was important in our activity. Fourth reason was to also develop certain recommendations for civil society organizations who are, for us, the natural mediators between citizens and policymakers, and also to give concrete recommendations to policymakers. As we know, there are still waves of populist movement, there are still very, very Eurosceptic parties, very extremist parties. So how can, the policymakers that are more pro-European, that are trying to defend democracy, defend the EU, how can those have better recommendations on engaging citizens and making sure citizens are committed to the European values? We also did this to have just some fun discussing Europe. So this is why we started from a process of creative destruction. So what was the methodology? We actually created this methodology through a methodology which was already existing. It's called the TRIZ methodology. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a really, really interactive way to have a workshop. And this was a method created in the 80s by Altschuler. And it is the theory of inventive problem solving. So basically, you start from a point of creative destruction. So hence our question was, what do you think is the worst possible outcome for the European election? What's your nightmare? What's the thing that really, really, really you would want to avoid? As you can see, that was the first question we asked both online and also offline when we were running workshops. The second question is, once you've thought about your nightmare, and we had really, really interesting, answers. People were saying, oh yeah, imagine a European elections with a lot of, let's say, very extremist, almost fascist MEP, which would dominate the elections, or think about the fact that no one would turn up to vote. What would happen? Like, no one goes to vote on that day. So this starting point was really to allow people to imagine anything as creatively as possible and just to say it out loud without any fear that to be judged or anything. The second question was, when you think of this, what would you do? What do you think people would do? But especially, what would you do to actually achieve that? So we had a lot of young people, for example, saying, oh yeah, I would just go to my parents and tell everyone not to vote, or I would just, start spreading out fake news. Young people we reached out to, they're very digitally savvy. So they were like, yeah, we would use the internet, we would use social media. And so we really got them to think, what would you do to hijack the elections? In the third question, we asked them, so personally, now think about your own daily life. Are you doing anything that actually resembles that? Are you actually doing anything that resembles hijacking these elections? So especially young people and other citizens, of course, also elderly, were thinking more about, I don't talk about the elections enough to my family. I don't read the news enough. I always maybe just read the head titles on social media. I don't inform myself enough. So they started reflecting on the things that they were not actually doing in their daily life that could lead to a possible bad outcome of the elections. And then in the last question, we asked them, what can you do to stop this? And what do you pledge to do in the year of the election to actually do? So we had very nice also pledges from young people. For example, we're going to buy newspapers more. People don't buy newspapers anymore, and they don't read the news thoroughly. So one little pledge that I really enjoyed was when a young person just said, I'm just going to commit to buy a newspaper and just start reading instead of just listening to anything that is basically said on social media. And we have many more that my colleague Savannah will also give us. So what did we achieve with this crowdsourcing? We actually engaged citizens to reflect more on the future of democracy. We raised awareness. We actually told people, don't forget, next year we have the European elections, so make sure you're there to vote. We identified solutions that can improve our democratic participation, which Savannah will give us a bit of insights to. And we also informed EU policymakers about policy preferences of EU citizens, which we will continue doing also with the new mandate. So now I'll just pass the floor to Savannah so that she can also give you some insights on how many people we reached and what was said.
Thank you, Elisa. Yes, as Elisa already mentioned, we asked citizens to think about the worst case scenario, to identify what their role could be in achieving this worst case scenario, what they could be doing right now to actually achieve it, and what they could do to prevent it. So how did we actually implement this crowdsourcing? So we launched it in all 27 member states. And we also implemented this notion of digital first, but not digital only. As Elisa already mentioned, we're really big on digital democracy, but previous experiences piloting crowdsourcing, we know that just because it's digital doesn't mean it's accessible to everyone. So it was really important that in this crowdsourcing activity, especially because it was across all 27 member states, that it would not only be on the crowdsourcing platform. So how did we actually do this? So we implemented an online awareness campaign to reach citizens online individually through social media and things like that. But then we also partnered with and trained local CSOs to actually implement these workshops. And by workshops, I mean implementing these 4 questions that we asked. So what were the outcomes? We actually received 1,435 contributions from citizens, and the split between the online crowdsourcing and the in-person workshops was quite balanced. So 53.7% participated in the online crowdsourcing, and 46% participated in the workshops. We also reached all 27 member states, as I already mentioned, and the most contributions came from Belgium, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, and Italy. This was, of course, split between the online and the offline workshops. As Elisa already mentioned, we managed to reach a wide range of ages. So actually, we got contributions from people ranging between 13 years old to actually 19 years old, 90. And we also achieved the gender balance. And I think in our perspective, the fact that it was online and offline really helped us achieve not only balance in terms of age and gender, but also just reaching people that might have not otherwise participated in something like this. So what were the main outcomes in terms of risks and challenges in safeguarding and promoting democracy across the EU? So the first challenge or the first concern that citizens had was actually about large-scale conflict. As we know, citizens are really concerned about what's happening in Ukraine right now with the Russian invasion, but also concerned that maybe there will be a World War III at some point. This was kind of like on the extreme side. Another concern is the rise of right-wing populism, especially what this would mean for European values. So if right-wing populists are elected that want to push a nationalist agenda that might even want to leave the EU, where does that leave us with European values and our beliefs about democracy as a whole? And then the third one was efficiency consequences of extremism. So this is actually quite interesting because citizens were not only concerned about what it would mean on their human rights or on their democratic rights to have right-wing populism, but they were also concerned that if we elect really extremist parties, what would this actually mean or look in the parliament? Would this mean that decisions are not made as fast as they should be, or we're not as efficient when it comes to decision making? So this was one of the major concerns. And then the last one, unsurprisingly, citizens remain concerned about unfair elections and the potential for foreign interference. And by that, citizens are worried about votes being manipulated, there being disinformation that might bias the results, and they also raise concern about how the digitalization or new technologies can impact the elections, basically. And so with those concerns in mind, we were able to not only extract citizen pledges, as Elisa already mentioned, about actually sharing information that is reliable, actually going out to vote, but we were actually able to consolidate this information to develop recommendations for civil society and for decision makers. You will see that there is kind of a theme between both. So starting with the recommendations to civil society, the first one was to enhance civic education and digital literacy. Citizens thought that the best way to do this was actually civil society should gather up, develop educational programs and initiatives to ensure that citizens are actually aware how they can vote, where they can vote, when to vote, why they should vote, and what all the information that they need to actually make that decision. So this can be through workshops or going to schools or awareness raising campaigns on social media, for example. They also think that civil society should actively commit to fact-checking and countering disinformation. This is not something citizens can do alone. Civil society has a big role to play in this, and this was something that was highlighted from citizens. And so they believe that civil society should provide accurate information that is available for citizens and that is understandable. The last recommendation was to advocate for transparency in election processes. Again, citizens see civil society in a way as their defenders. Civil society can go and advocate to their policymakers or to decision makers that there should be more transparency in election processes. So again, how to vote, when to vote, what do you need, what papers do you need to vote, where can you actually do it, so that people are not left out in the voting process. And then for recommendations to decision makers, citizens really want decision makers to strengthen citizen-centric democracy. Unlike sometimes popular opinion, citizens want to be involved. It's not always that they can be or see the way how to, but they want to be involved and they want policymakers to help them do that. So they want policymakers to strengthen democratic processes, and such a way could be through online forums where citizens can directly contribute, but then also crowdsourcing like what we've done so they can actually contribute to literal recommendations for decision makers. They also want decision makers to do more to combat disinformation and promote media literacy. So again, they should be funding and implementing educational programs, supporting civil society to actually achieve these aims. And then the last one was address barriers to participation to ensure fair representation. So again, decision makers or politicians or institutions can do more to raise awareness about the barriers to participation, but also solve them, for example, by simplifying the voting process for different groups of people. And also one thing that came up in the crowdsourcing, that citizens really want civil society and decision makers to actually work together to achieve these aims. Citizens see this as a great potential. And especially one thing that came up was that citizens want civil society and decision makers to work together to address Euroscepticism. And they believe that you can do this by actively monitoring and counteracting anti-EU rhetoric, especially on digital means. As we know, citizens are more and more online, and we see a lot of anti-EU rhetoric, and it's not about lying or making the EU seem better than it is, but it's about just providing real information about what the EU is doing, what it can do for you, its shortcomings, but most importantly, what it can do for citizens. And those were the main results.
Thanks a lot. And then now, I guess that I'll pass the floor to Claire. But before I say that, like, we're happy to receive questions if you want to know more about the methodology and everything and the results. And we were also, after Claire ends, we were also wondering if you could also share maybe a bit if you are going to be working around the European elections this year, just to know if you're going to do anything to support the European elections. We would be happy to know more about also your work.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm now going to say a few words about another crowdsourcing exercise that ECAS has implemented a few years ago, which is using a similar methodology. The so-called ECAS Awards that some of you may already be familiar with, which this year focused on fostering political participation ahead, of course, of the upcoming elections. So the ECAS Award is an initiative that we have launched in 2020. The goal here is really to gather recommendations from citizens so they can share their thoughts, their solutions, their recommendation about a topic that we propose, which is always linked to their rights as citizens of the European Union. So to give you a few examples, in 2020, the topic was about the most EU mobile citizens-friendly locations in the EU. The following year, it was about innovative ideas. How can we innovate EU citizenship as it is nowadays? Last year, we asked citizens if they could share with us what rights they would like to have as EU citizens, or what rights they already have but think should be further improved. So, for example, we had one of the winners who shared with us that according to her, equal parenting rights should be further improved and streamlined in the EU. And this year, the topic is fostering political participation. So I'm not going to say too much because at the end of this conference, we'll have the chance to know who the winner is. However, just to explain a bit how it works, it's very straightforward. We have two different phases for the ECAS Awards. So the first phase is really gathering contributions, recommendations, solutions proposed by citizens. How can we foster political participation? What should be done so citizens are encouraged to use their rights to vote? The goal, of course, as explained earlier, to use the crowdsourcing platform is to gather recommendations from different geographical locations and also from citizens from different age categories. Then we close the first phase and so people can no longer contribute. And we make all contributions public for phase 2 because phase 2 is what we call the voting phase. So if you are a voter, it doesn't mean that you have to be a contributor. Everybody is more than welcome to vote, even if they did not contribute to phase 1, and to elect the best idea. And of course, the person who has received the highest number of votes is the winner of the awards. So I would like to share today the main trends that we have observed throughout this crowdsourcing exercise, which can be divided in 4 different categories. The first one being knowledge and awareness. So what the participants have shared with us is that according to them, one of the reasons why people don't participate to the European Parliament elections is because they don't really understand what the EU institutions are about. So one of the solutions proposed was to raise awareness already in school, so to make sure that children are taught about the institutions and know what the EU can do for them. They also suggested to have targeted awareness campaigns, for example, targeting first-time voters or EU mobile citizens, because of course they represent a very specific category, since EU mobile citizens can choose where to vote for the European elections in their member state of origin or of residence. And they also suggested to make institutions more visible in general in the media. Then the second main recommendation that we have seen through the recommendation that we have received from participants to the crowdsourcing exercise is linked to technology. So what was recommended is, first of all, to create online tools that are easy to use, where citizens can access information about the elections, where to vote, when to register, what is the deadline, as of what age am I allowed to vote, and so on and so forth. The second recurring recommendation was around e-voting, most likely provided by young participants. But the idea, according to them, was to say, if people can e-vote, we can also encourage citizens who cannot physically go to the polling stations to be part of the democratic process, and therefore they are encouraged to use their right to vote. Then a lot of citizens recommended to engage citizens more. The idea here is to innovate about the democratic approach and try to have more public consultation, because if citizens are already asked to raise their voice outside of election days, they will be more, of course, inclined to participate on the day of the elections. Last but not least, the last trend that I would like to share is around communication. So the participants to the crowdsourcing platform have shared that they had the feeling that sometimes the way we convey messages around the institutions can be a bit too technical. So their suggestion was really to simplify the message as much as possible so it speaks to citizens, and also to come with very, very concrete examples of what the EU can do, what impact it has on their daily lives, and that way they will understand better why it is very important to vote. I won't share more because I want to keep some suspense for the end of the conference, and we look forward to hearing the winning idea. But in the meantime, indeed, if you have any questions, please let us know, or any comments. And as Elisa said, if there is an initiative that you have either implemented or participated in to foster political participation, please feel free to let us know. Thank you.
The 780 parliament.
Yeah, we did have some, we held this big activity. Actually, the first one we did was at the ECAS event of the Economic and Social Committee, where there were 100 of young people, and lobbying did come up as one of the nightmares for Europe. So I can confirm that it did, but I will pass the floor also to Savannah, maybe.
Yes, definitely. So actually, this is maybe a good moment to share that we will also be, we're producing these first aid democratic toolkits where these results will be present. So there were definitely more concerns that were highlighted. Lobbying was definitely one of them. Also electing MEPs that don't actually represent the average person's desires or needs. So these definitely came up, but these were like the main trends, the ones that were mentioned the most. But like Elisa said, the lobbying definitely came up, and electing MEPs that don't represent our best interests definitely came up.
Yes, and also around, let's say, transparency issues were linked to that as well, because like, you know, the young people especially, they were like, how can we make sure that big corporations are not always having backdoors with political institutions when they negotiate and everything. So there were a lot of like solutions that were concerning more about transparency and making sure that also civil society were more in the conversation, because they were also representing citizens better than corporations most probably. So there were a lot of recommendations in that sense too. Also, AI was also something that came up as a dystopia, a lot around hacking too, around how digital tools can be manipulated. So also when we talk about e-voting, it's very, yeah, needs to be you need to strike a balance between security, trust also in technology, and everything else that can happen, such as algorithms that are manipulated as well. So we did have big discussions also around those, let's say, dystopic scenarios.
We have a question from home. So someone is asking, were there noticeable variations across EU countries in terms of the nightmares that emerged?
Off the top of my head, I can think of one example that really intrigued me, was that, for example, in Lithuania, one of our partner organizations actually was able to implement a very huge event with over 100 students. And one of the main concerns that they had was actually that the parliament would be very left-wing. But this was actually because of the history of Lithuania. And so there were some country differences in that sense of what perspectives of what it means to be right-wing or left-wing or populist or this, that were distinctions just because of historical and political reasons. But the actual analysis, there was not necessarily country-specific, but we did see these differences as they came up, especially when the quantity of contributions coming from a certain country was much larger than other countries. As you saw in the map, there were variations.
And to add to this, I would also talk about the process. So I have to say that we were approached by for example, some teachers that were very enthusiastic about implementing the project, the activity with, for example, their students, and that worked quite well. But I also know of a group of people that were not very confident in giving these answers, because sometimes the political culture is very different from one country to another. I'm Italian, we're very outspoken. We talk about politics even for breakfast. It's not a problem, but we've also worked in other countries in Europe, and the political culture, when it's about crowdsourcing, can be very, very different as well. So talking about something that you think is a nightmare or something really bad and being maybe judged by other people in the room did take an effect to some groups, and they came back to us saying that they didn't feel comfortable doing this activity. While we said you need to push on the gamification kind of approach, not take it so seriously. So we had to kind of guide them into this sort of methodology where it's basically a game to arrive to something which is much more constructive. So we did see also different, people who came up to us and say, oh, this maybe won't work out because, groups are they don't feel confident about talking about their political, stances.
Elisa, I have a question, because I know that we framed this exercise deliberately in order to be more provocative, more interesting, starting from the dystopia. But my question is the following. What is your sense about the balance between defending and positively promoting? Because somehow in the last couple of years, here at least at EU level, also from the institutions, we're hearing all the time that we are defending our democracy, defense of democracy package, protecting our borders, So it feels a bit like as if like an isolative approach, like really excluding the realities and the outside rather than including and be inclusive. So also considering the subject of our conference today, so do you have this feeling that basically people are afraid and have the need to be protected and defended, or do they see eventually this as a barrier for inclusion and also for globalistic somehow integration?
Okay, thanks, Asya. I think actually the defensive perspective honestly comes more from the EU institutions rather than our activity. I think that, even since we also work a lot in technology, we always see the defensive aspect more from the institutions and from the policymakers. We try to regulate a lot. We try to protect people from AI. We try to protect people, which is good. But I don't think that from a citizen's point of view, at least from what we've seen from the exercise, people feel like they need to be defended. They feel like they should be more, actually more in a co-creation process with their policymakers. They feel like they should be much more open. They feel like policymakers should be also more open to them and more transparent to them. They don't feel like they should be protected by the European Union. They feel like they want to be involved by the European Union. That's a big difference. We don't want a sort of kind of parental relationship between policymakers and citizens and, parents thinking they know best for children. No, the children want to be involved. And maybe the children not always knows the best, but it is important to hear their perspective because they see things also differently. And I think that with crowdsourcing, this is kind of what we want to achieve. The whole point of crowdsourcing is not that citizens are experts that can help contribute in, drafting up a technical legislation. That's not the point. The point of crowdsourcing is really to go to citizens and listen to them and say, what's your problem today? How can the EU help? How can we help? That's the main question. And I think that through these activities, we start from something very, very destructive. And people are like, whoa, are you really asking me that question? Because usually the EU asks us about our dream, and you're telling me to tear down the EU. And we're like, yes, exactly, tear it down for us. And then we'll go back to what can we possibly achieve in a more constructive and positive manner that will make you want to actually have an EU institution that helps you, create the right policies. Yes.
When you did this kind of exercise with European citizens, consultation, crowdsourcing, did you worry that there is a risk that those who participate are very much in favor of the EU and those who are more critical, more mistrustful of the EU stay aside? They just don't have anything to do with, any kind of exercise that they perceive as, being in favor of the European Union. I ask this because I had the feeling, for example, when I watched the conference on the future of Europe, that everyone was there was very supportive of the European Union. This was kind of surprising because I thought, wow, I'm going to hear now people who are very vocal, very critical of the European Union, but it was not all the case. And I think it was because people self-selected themselves, when they decided to participate in this.
Yeah, so I think that this exercise actually allowed people to be more vocal, exactly because we put them in a situation in which we were asking the opposite question to them. So you could already see like the trends, especially because last year when we did hold these exercises, the Ukraine invasion was a very, very, very prominent topic, and it still is today, but it just happened recently. So when we started these exercises, we were like, and we did have some discussions right in the beginning about, also young people thinking, Putin's a really strong leader. We need stronger leaders in the EU, someone who guides us. So we did have a lot of conversations, but that could only happen if you allow people in the room to feel like they're not judged. So we really needed to put them into a situation in which it was a game. It was really something like, just tell us what you think. No one's going to judge you. Actually, you know what? And we were provoking other people to even go worse than what the first one said. So if this one was like thinking about, okay, a parliament with all these Nazis or something, we were like, okay, what do you think, how can we avoid that? Or what would you do as a Nazi to actually do that? I mean, it sounds very, very provocative. And we were even surprised that the commission actually, funded our operating grants when we proposed it, because we were like, whoa, they will never buy this. But it actually worked because it lowered the barriers in the room, and everyone was just feeling, oh, this is fun. They were laughing. They were like, I would be a hacker. I would like try to find weapons. Okay, fine. But then the last two questions were really focused on them. What are you doing in your life that actually resembles a tiny bit, even in a fraction? And they really started thinking, oh yeah, I don't really need to read the news. I always listen to, Nigel Farage. And I was like, do you know that when you do that, you actually increase his viewers? They're all algorithms that make you be in an echo chamber and everything. So we really started making them reflect on their daily life. And then afterwards, they reached the pledges and they're like, I should be doing this much more in my life, especially with the upcoming elections. And that's how we got it.
Yes, I just want to add something, and it connects your question and Asia's question a little bit. I think definitely the parts, the methodology itself allows people to talk about things that they usually wouldn't. But I think the fact that it has these 4 tiers of questions also allows, maybe in the first question, they can't think about what the worst nightmare would be. Maybe they're very pro-EU, but as you continue to question, especially in a group setting, as you continue to question, you will eventually kind of unlock those things that might not be at the top of your head. So that's one way where the methodology really allows people to express themselves, and also might tap into this, maybe not anti-EU, but sort of critical of the EU perspective. And also another point is that we not only did the crowdsourcing online, we also partnered with local CSOs that were not really focused on the EU topic or maybe necessarily on political participation. They just had a specific target group, whether it be high school students that are girls learning technology, or whether it would be minority of Estonia. So we kind of tried to reach out to these CSOs that could implement this methodology to those citizens that might not, if they see an ad saying contribute to the EU, like they might not actually do it. And then linking it back to Asia's question, also one of the recommendations that maybe wasn't the top of the list, but it did come up, was actually dismantle the European Parliament and build it up again. That was actually something that citizens said, because as much as citizens might like the idea of the EU and might like the values that it represents, it doesn't mean that they're not critical of how it's structured right now and what we can do to actually redevelop it in a different way. So one of the recommendations in the report is actually dismantle the European Parliament, build it from scratch, and let's do it better. So I don't think that as much as it's hard to reach those really like anti-EU people, I think our activity did it's the best it could by partnering with CSOs, by creating an activity that the methodology was a bit different. Yeah, these were the recommendations that came up.
I don't know if we have time, but we have another question from home. What media channels did you use to try to reach diverse groups of citizens across Europe to participate to the crowdsourcing?
Well, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, because while I developed the idea, conveniently went on maternity leave, and she was the one left to implement the whole thing, and she did a great job.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, so we did it through the normal, like usual social media. We used Instagram. We tried to use LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, well, X now. But as you know, there are a lot more regulations about what we can actually post on X and on Facebook when it comes to political issues. So in a way, our targeted ads or our campaigns were not so successful online, in the sense of they were being blocked by these apps. So what really was important was reaching out to CSOs who, even if they were not at capacity to implement the workshop, whether it be time constraints or whatever, they were actually able to disseminate this information and this opportunity to their members, whether it be through a newsletter or whether it be by like word of mouth. So I would say that the social media campaign was not the best way to, it was necessary, but it wasn't the one that achieved the most results. I think, as we probably see it in our everyday life, partnering with people on the ground, with local CSOs, is really the best way to reach populations that we don't always reach here in Brussels.
Thank you. I'm afraid we don't have time for more questions, but please feel free to come to us during coffee break, or of course to reach us later on. I think it's time now to welcome on stage our moderator, Florence Hanson, who's going to introduce the first panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. So I'm going to squeeze in here and leave the mic. Actually, I think I'm going to need more mics for all our speakers. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to those of you who are following us online. It's good to see that you've been active with questions as well. You will have the chance at the end of this particular panel, as well as at the end of our second panel, to ask questions, whether you're in the room or online, so let's hope that you do so. We really are aiming for a dialogue between our speakers, but with you as well, rather than a simple series of presentations and explanations. So this very first panel this morning will help us discuss with our panelists, with our speakers, how we can try and shape a more inclusive EU. We've already heard some interesting ideas coming out of the results of the exercise carried out by ECAS, but we also need to hear from very specific groups this morning what has been done, how it has been done, and what the outcomes were, so that we can all use those as examples for future activities. So it's my pleasure to welcome to our panel, and you're very welcome to use the stairs. You don't have to climb up that high step here. I certainly would use the stairs as I did. So welcome Simona Barbu, who's policy officer at FIANSA, that's the European Federation of National Organizations working with the homeless. Good morning, Simona. Gabriela Chabanova, who's the executive director of the Ergo Network, that's the European Roma Grassroots Organization Network. Good morning, Gabriela. Christian Leahu, who's policy officer at the Directorate General Justice and Consumers at the European Commission. Good morning to you. And Ionel Zamfir, who's part of the European Parliamentary Research Service at the European Parliament, obviously. So welcome to you all. Have a seat indeed. No particular order, just, make yourselves comfortable. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you what you have been doing or what you have been witnessing in your various activities, because indeed, one of the things that we often hear from citizens, from people we talk to when we sort of go home, if I may put it like this, when we talk to our families, when we talk to our friends who are not necessarily involved in the EU bubble or in shaping the EU one way or another. And many of them tend to think that the EU is quite remote from their preoccupations, from their problems, from their aspirations. So it is indeed quite worrying, as we've heard, but it's particularly worrying in the context of the upcoming elections. And inclusiveness is now proving to be more essential than it ever was. So Simona, I'm going to turn to you first, because as part of the work that you do with the homeless people, do you think that things actually have changed since the last election, since 2019, in terms of inclusiveness? And have things actually improved or have they worsened?
Well, I hope this works. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Florence, for your question. I am afraid I don't have a yes or no question, because unfortunately, when it comes to homelessness in general, it's hard to have comprehensive and comparative data. And then when we look a layer further, when it comes to political engagement, it is again difficult to know exactly what is happening across Europe, because we don't have this kind of information. We have different definitions of homelessness across member states in Europe, and even within countries. The homelessness is defined differently, so that makes it, from the get-go, very difficult to know where we are. What I can say is that our members, and maybe here I will take a second to tell everyone that we are at FIANSA, we are a European coalition of NGOs who support people experiencing homelessness in their everyday needs. We have around 130 members across Europe, and some of them are also cities and universities. And we have a secretariat here in Brussels, from where we work with the European institutions, and we try to bring forward on the public agenda the complexity of what means homelessness and how are people affected by this. So our members on the ground, they do work on facilitating voter registration, for example, for people who experience homelessness. And they are very much aware of the need to remove barriers that people face in these processes, because being homeless doesn't mean that you lose your right to vote. People are still right holders, and being involved and represented in political elections, in in exercising their political rights, it's important to bring forward the needs that they have. And maybe I'll leave it here and tell you a bit more later about what we do.
Okay, thank you. Gabriela, from your point of view and from the point of view of the work that you do with Roma people, how would you describe the situation now as compared to 5 years ago?
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Yeah, I think that it's always hard to kind of give this description or kind of compare what is happening. What I see, like for example, like we are ahead of the European elections. So at this very moment, we have 4 members of Romani origin in the European Parliament. We actually achieved quite a good work and cooperation with them. We have anti-racism and diversity intergroup in the European Parliament, which is very much focusing on the issues which are related to the Roma and other racial groups. And we can see that, for example, with the Black Lives Matter movement, we actually had much more attention to the issues. I think globally, and it was also reflected here at the European Union, that we have actually more initiatives. We have funds which are also available. I mean, when it comes to the Roma, we started already the previous election period. So practically from 2012, we have a specific strategic framework for Roma. We also have support, which is actually within the institutions here in the European Commission. We have a Roma unit. We have Roma working also in the European Commission. And we have, of course, Parliament and other institutions dealing with the issue. What we actually see that on the one hand, we are very happy and we are kind of like going with the flow, with this sort of a global trend to make sure that the anti-racial groups can actually empower themselves and being part of this, of the kind of policy making and making sure that the policy is making more inclusive, including the people themselves. We also see on the other hand, and that's when it comes to sort of a fear for this election, that the far right, it's actually racing and that the polls are not very positive for us. We are actually even afraid that the right or far right groups might actually achieve even 1/3 of the seats in the European Parliament, and the work that we did over the decade might actually be vanished, or might actually there might be another trend because of the majority of people would kind of tend to kind of not support the work that we are doing today. So I think these elections especially, I mean, we are bearing some fruit, but it's also for us, we have to really make sure that we mobilize the people. We make sure that the conversations, but the elections themselves, they are inclusive and they really are open to those people who would not otherwise think. And we see like generally, and I think that the work that you show in the previous panel was amazing, that we don't tend to care so much or to look what is around in the politics. And at the end, we might actually go and vote uninformed. And we might actually tend to give a vote to someone who might actually, we don't know exactly what they might bring as in their programs. And I think that now we have to really make sure that the kind of misinformation, disinformation, and even like access to information, but generally to the tools of the elections are in place. So yeah, this is just a kind of what I see. It's a kind of a hope, but also a kind of a fear that we have to overcome by doing much more work.
A big but. Christian, from the point of view of the Commission, there's clearly a lot of work done on inclusiveness in many different areas. But how, as a whole, how is the tendency towards inclusiveness? What kind of work has been put in place over the last 5 years, and what's the outcome? What does it look like?
I hope this works. No, thanks. Well, thanks first of all for the opportunity to be here and present the work of the Commission on the topic of participation of citizens with disabilities in elections. And to mirror the previous speakers, I would say that what appears to have changed is how prominent this topic has become for EU institutions, but also for member states. You may be aware that the European Commission issues after each election a post-election report, which in the case of the 2019 elections reflected many challenges that different groups face when participating in elections, including citizens with disabilities. But this topic has also gained some traction on the Council's agenda, and it's also been repeatedly supported. I mean, the participation of citizens with disabilities has been repeatedly supported by the European Parliament in numerous resolutions. You may also be aware that the European Commission facilitates exchanges among member states through a European Cooperation Network on Elections. There we have been discussing for the last 5 years about different tools, methods, processes that would facilitate the participation of citizens with disabilities in elections. We've been talking about adapted information, voting machines, accessible voting machines, complementary voting methods, and so on. Building on this, and as announced in the Disability Strategy of published in 2021, the Commission prepared a guide of good electoral practices in the member states addressing participation of citizens with disabilities in elections. It was published last year in December as part of a larger package named the citizenship package, and it reflects the various measures that member states took to address these challenges that persons with disabilities face when participating in elections. I also had a slide on this guide, but I'm not sure if someone could maybe show it.
You have the clicker? The clicker seems to have disappeared. Did one of our previous speakers steal the clicker? There we go, thank you. So if you press on the green, let me do it. And then we'll
it's only one slide.
That's yours. Okay, so maybe
it's mine. Green.
Try again.
No. This one. Maybe.
Maybe we go
Okay,
further.
this is another one.
No. Okay. No. Yes. Okay.
Oh, no, I sent the slide this morning. Maybe it was too late. Sorry.
It could be that, you know, with the last minute preparations.
Great. Then maybe I could talk some more about some practices in member states that address this topic.
Okay, very good. But you can give us a couple of examples in the follow-up question. Yeah, very good. Yeah. We can do it like that. Lionel, we've heard already of some of the work that has been done at the Parliament level, and your work focuses more on gender balance, really. So what have you been doing in terms of research, but also in terms of implementation of new measures in the Parliament, and maybe with the elections in particular in sight? It should be on.
The Parliament is a strong supporter of
gender
equality, so I think it's no secret for anyone. It's important to emphasize that gender equality is very important for the EU. It's a fundamental value. There is an obligation in the treaty for the EU to pursue gender equality through all its policies. And of course, this has an impact on all the policies and measures that refer to political representation. Now, the Parliament has advocated various measures. So there are numerous resolutions where the Parliament makes various recommendations on what we would do, on what we should do to improve representation of women in politics, but also on what would be done to assure a better participation of women in politics in general. But because we are now very close to the elections, I'm going to insist on a specific aspect, which is the gender balance in the European Parliament itself. And I'm going to show you the mechanisms that are at work, what can be done better. And I'm also going to show you that the ball is actually with the member states very much. So the Parliament has made some proposals, but they are not yet implemented. If we go to I have to change myself. First of all, where do we stay? Where do we stay at European level? Now, that's a graph. So I use the statistical data from the European Institute of Gender Equality. And this shows the share of women in parliaments in Europe, in local and regional assemblies in the European countries. And if you look, you see that very few countries are above the 40% limit, which, let's say, it's where we enter a zone of relative gender equality. It's also about the leaders of political parties, and there you see an outsider, which is Finland. I'm not going to enter into this. I myself not a specialist in the political situation in the country, but otherwise, as I say, so at all levels of political representations in elected assemblies, we see that we are still, in most cases, below 40%. And the European Parliament, which is itself at 40%, is doing really, really good in comparison with what we have at the national member states in Europe. Now, if you look at the progress, again, I'm going to use the index developed by the Institute, European Institute of Gender Equality, because it groups together representation in executives, but also in elected assemblies and at national and regional level. We see that some countries have made impressive progress. So you see the longer the red bar is, the more progress they've made. But interestingly, we see that among those countries which have the lowest share of women in executives or in governments and elected assemblies, it's exactly those countries that have made least progress. So if you look at really at the left end of the graph, it's also because, of course, if countries have not made progress, they've remained at the bottom of this index. But we have a group of countries where there is a real need to make progress. Now, what can be done to have more women elected in parliaments in general? And of course, this also applies to the European Parliament in particular. So we can address the supply side. What does it mean? So we need to have enough women on the electoral list. If we want voters to vote for women as well, we need enough women on the electoral list. Otherwise, of course, it's impossible to achieve gender equality. And the most straightforward tool is electoral quotas, which can be or not accompanied by ranking order rules. This is very effective, but I'm going to talk afterwards about it. Then party level measures, because parties, they propose their list of candidates. So there are those who are in charge of this. And some parties in Europe, actually quite a number of parties in Europe have established voluntary party quotas. So they've made a pledge in their internal rules that they will propose a certain share of women on candidates list. It's mostly center left parties that use this approach, but we also see it increasingly adopted by center-right parties. And here I would mention the German Christian Democrats, although it will be implemented in a couple of years. Then it's also about the party political culture, which has to be women-friendly. So women shouldn't feel excluded. Of course, it's also important that women are simply present in a sufficient number among the members of the party. Then institutional structure, so gender equality could be enshrined in statutes. Women committees, for example, are helpful to promote gender equality, and sometimes committees that have the special task of overseeing candidates list from a gender equality perspective. Then, even if we have enough women on the list, it's important that these women are qualified candidates and are not there just to fulfill mathematical gender quota. For this, training is very important, but also resources. So women very often complain about having more limited access to resources when they campaign in elections. Then very important is to eliminate obstacles. And here, violence against women in politics is a very serious obstacle. So many women do not enter into politics because they are worried about the potential of gender violence. Or they leave politics after a while. And then, of course, very important for women is that they can reconcile their political life, political career with their personal life. For example, having access to maternity leave or childcare facilities while being members of parliament is very important. And for example, in the European Parliament, there was, a discussion about this because women, if they are on maternity leave, basically they cannot be, represented by someone else. So it's an issue in most parliaments in Europe that there is not a structure in place that would allow women members to go on maternity leave and participate, let's say, online in the debate or mandate someone else to represent their view. Then, if you look at the demand side, so here we talk about voters and. Of course, when I say qualified women, we already go into the demand side because people will choose politicians that they perceive as being qualified. But it's also important that voters do not show any gender bias. And here, well, I looked at some research. Very difficult to say. Sometimes it depends on the level. If it's European, regional, national, depends on the country. There may be a slight bias, but not always towards men. There may also be towards women. Here, again, parties play an important role because they have to champion women, qualified women. Then it's about the general political culture in society. So it's very important to fight gender stereotypes. So I looked, for example, the research by it's an organization. It's called the Reykjavik Gender Equality Index, and it shows that it's about G7, not about the EU member states. But if you look there are several EU states. You see that people are equally favorably towards women politicians in general. But when it comes to the leader, to the prime minister, or to the president, then we have a significant gender gap. Both women and men are, let's say, more mistrustful of women being a prime minister than of men. So we see it's okay when you talk about members of parliament, but when you come to the leadership position, things start to change. So it's important to find this kind of gender stereotypes. And of course, mass media plays a very important role. So unfortunately, during electoral campaign, mass media does not give enough room to women candidates, and when it does, maybe it focuses on issues that are not necessarily related to the political campaign, such as private life of women candidates. Now, if you look a little bit at the electoral quotas, so this was the situation. I mean, we did this graph in 2021. But there you have the situation in 2019, and I can tell you, when you talk about quotas, nothing has changed. Several countries have increased their minimal quota for women. I think Portugal, Greece, now they have a higher quota. But anyway, what's important? So you see, I mean, if you look at the quotas, it's not like countries that have quotas, they have more egalitarian group of MEPs in the European Parliament. Like they are really distributed everywhere. So why is it so? Now we expect quotas to work and really have quotas grouped somehow towards your left hand side of the graph. Because quotas are very, very effective in closed systems. If, of course, they are well designed. So we have closed systems in a few countries. So where you see the orange circle in France, Spain, Portugal. Well, Hungary doesn't have a quota. In Germany, you have a closed system but doesn't have a quota. And then one of the countries that has the lowest share of women in parliament, Romania, well, it has a closed electoral system, but well, the quota doesn't work very well because the quota is just a very general objective of gender equality. So it says nothing more than these, and sanctions are also very weak. Now, in open systems, so where voters can choose their candidates from the list, so they can work better or worse. So taking into account all that I said previously, because, well, when voters are able to choose their candidates, there may be a slight gender bias, so there may be sometimes not enough resources for female candidates, because their candidates from the same party, they compete among themselves, and this completely changes the picture. But if you look, actually, you see that countries that have a gender quota and an open voting system on the list, they are actually pretty close to their quota. I mean, of course, it's a minimum threshold, but they're pretty close, maybe excepting Belgium, but well, in Belgium, it's more complicated, you know, with the federal system, with a big number of parties. Anyway, it's good to keep in mind that, well, of course, the ideal would be to be at 50%, but this is mathematically quite hard for some countries. Those who have an even number, so if they have an odd number of members, they cannot be at perfect equality. If they have a small number of members, like Estonia, then again, so Estonia has 7 members, so necessarily 3, it will have 4 at most, or I mean, to come as close as possible to parity, it will be 3 to 4, which means it's 42 to 58, so still far away, but there's a mathematical constraint. Now, that's a little bit the picture. As I said, not much has changed. Now, the parliament would have lied because this all at the member states level. You have the EU there. There is no quota at the EU level. Would it be legally possible? Yes, it would be legally possible because the European elections are regulated by the European Elections Act. And the Parliament has tried twice to have some sort of obligation for member states to ensure gender equality in the electoral list, and it hasn't been implemented. So during the previous term, there was a proposal to reform the act. So the Parliament supported the idea of having a general obligation, but then the Council suppressed it. But the act is not implemented anyway because it's a more complicated procedure. It has to be ratified by individual member states, which may need to change their constitution for this, so it's quite complicated. And during this term, again, the Parliament attempted it, and so it proposed that member states should use the model that best fits their electoral system, because we see how much the electoral system matters. Again, this proposal has stalled in the Council. There is also a proposal there for a UI constituency, where we should have a quota, but as I said, it's stalled in the Council, so it's no way this is going to be approved before the election. So there is this possibility.
Thank you, Lionel. Thank you very much. I'm afraid I have to cut you there because I think we're going in a lot of detail, and I think that it's very important that we understand the broad picture, but I'd really like to keep some time for discussion also, because these were very interesting examples, and I'm sure some of the other speakers or people in the room will have some comments or questions related to that. I understand we're now ready to show you a slide, Christian. So if you'd like to briefly present it, and you can take the clicker and see if we get directly to it, or maybe. Yeah. Or maybe it will be shown from there. Will it be shown from there directly? We don't have to click.
So you can speak and we will try to.
Well,
we'll try to put it up. While
many thanks and apologies for causing these technical issues. Well, before actually talking about what's in the guide, I would just say a few words about its objective, its general objective, and some words about the preparations behind it. Well, as I was mentioning earlier, the main objective of this guide was to better frame the discussions with member states in the European Cooperation Network on elections, but also more generally to support any efforts to facilitate the exercise of electoral rights of persons with disabilities. We started preparing the guide in 2022. Well, as I was mentioning, this comes from a commitment taken under the disability strategy, which was published in 2021. And we started preparations with establishing a dedicated subgroup of the electoral network. We also benefited from inputs from member states as part of a large survey that we conducted in the network on frameworks, applicable frameworks, and practices that are used to support the participation of persons with disabilities. We also wanted to be inclusive in the preparation of this guide and sought input from all relevant stakeholders, including ECAS, to whom we are also grateful for sending their contribution to this. And well, as I was saying, the guide that was published last year in December 2023 as part of a larger citizenship package.
You haven't really got any outcome yet, any results, any impact assessment yet?
Just a second, I think it shows there. We can show it. Well, we can see it all. Well, as you can see in this infographic, the guide covers various stages of the electoral cycle, which go beyond voting proper. Planning for disability inclusive elections, close dialogue and cooperation with representative disability organizations, awareness raising, training and support for election officials, provision of accessible information about accessible elections are all particularly important in the preparatory phases of elections. The guide also explores practices seeking to increase the accessibility of registration procedures. We're talking mostly about registration of voters and candidates, but also the accessibility of polling stations, with all the elements that are entailed with this, polling booths, ballot boxes, or also the range of voting options that persons with disabilities have at their disposal. And we're talking about mobile voting, curbside voting, internet voting, and also proxy voting. Access to the adjudication of electoral disputes, collection of data regarding participation of persons with disabilities, and also monitoring of election accessibility are also in focus. This didn't appear in a vacuum. It's complemented and builds on multiple synergies of many proposals that the Commission put forward during these years. I'm also talking about the revision of the electoral directives, which has specific elements addressed to persons with disabilities, the newly adopted political advertising regulation, which also mentions persons with disabilities as addressees of transparency notices, which should also be accessible to them. Transparency notices that should accompany political advertisements. And we could also mention here the e-voting compendium, which was adopted as part of the same package as the guide, which also addresses the participation of persons with disabilities, and a recommendation which was published last year, shortly after the citizenship package, on inclusive and resilient elections, which which basically, let's say, is the more operational element in all this arsenal that the Commission deployed to support participation of persons with disabilities.
There are lots of concrete measures, really, which is, I mean, it's a bit too early to talk about the outcome, but
yes,
maybe if we have another gathering in about 6 months from now, you might be able to give us some results. I'd like actually to pick up on what you were saying. Sorry for interrupting, but I really would like to get the discussion going, and I'd like to turn to you simply because I understand. I mean, was FEANSA involved, and if not, how do you see that kind of measure, and does it fit into the overall actions that you do?
It definitely does, but we were not involved in this particular work. However, we have been following other initiatives that were taken by the Parliament, and we've been working with a couple of MEPs, and we were glad to see that, for example, in 2020, there was a report on stock-taking of European elections, and I believe this was voted as well into a resolution in November 2020, and here homelessness is mentioned. In regards to the importance of having an address when you need to register. So for people who experience homelessness, they would often not be able to provide with an ID that where they have a permanent address, and that makes it impossible to even register in many countries still. And this was an initiative where we advocated for scrapping this condition from the directives and further implementing it at national level, of course. And it was in spring 2022 when another impact assessment was done on two directives, namely Directive 94/80 and Directive 93/109 of the Council. These are directives on electoral rights. And here, we again engaged in conversations around the importance of having an address and how can people register if they do not have this. So in the recast form of the directives, the reference to address has been scrapped in parts of the text. There was still some work to be done. I would have to update on this, but it's important to make sure that we also scrap these conditions completely in the annexes that are required from people. And I think in terms of this conversation, we have seen movement at the European level and in the EU legislation. But indeed, what we need to see now is that also member states implement it, because from the latest updates that we got from the ground, it's quite similar to what was being said about gender. Some countries are doing better than others, and we still see that people have these problems in practical terms. They can still not access the registration process.
I mean, feel free to let me know if any of you would like to bounce off something else, you know, that one of the other speakers mentions, or if you'd like to react or ask a further question. I think, you know, it would be nice if we could get an actual conversation going. But while you think about it, maybe I'd like to continue with you, Gabriela. We just heard from Simona some of the actions that were carried out by FIANSA. So in your case, clearly you have touched upon various approaches. I mean, you talked about the work that's been done in the Parliament, other initiatives that were taken to increase this inclusiveness.
Yeah, so thank you.
And if you have any outcome or any particular example, that would be good as well.
Yeah, I might actually start, like, so you kind of follow up a little bit on the gender image that we get in the European Parliament. I think that it's just so much like that if there are no women on the candidate list, we would not have them elected. And that's where we are starting as well. We don't have Roma on the candidate lists. And I think this is sort of the work which is very hard to influence, because this is coming from the kind of the member state political parties approach. And as in Ergo, our kind of the biggest fight or the kind of biggest work that we are having, it's fighting the anti-Gypsyism, which is a specific form of racism towards Roma. And unfortunately, the racism, this type of racism, it's actually existing everywhere, and it's very institutionalized. So, and especially because we live in a segregation, we are living isolated from the other people. Yeah, I mean, about 80% of Roma at European Union, they are practically living in the poverty. And just an example, only 18% of the people from the last FRA barometer, they answered they have some Roma friends. So practically we don't know each other. And if we have those few people who would actually go forward and being politically active and engaging even in the political parties, and we have such people, we don't have just activists and NGO activists, we also have some people who would actually go for the elections themselves, they might hardly get a very good position like on the candidate list to be actually elected. And we have this fight like constantly. And I know that if we are on the candidate list, we might also influence people to actually go out and vote. Myself, I was running twice in the municipal elections back in the Czech Republic. And I know that actually I influenced many people, starting with my family. That was like, since then, my family goes to vote every time. And before, it was like more, yeah, this is not my issue, and why I would vote, these people would never do anything for me anyways. You know, so there is this mistrust, there is this, we don't see ourselves in the public sphere, we don't see ourselves in the media, we don't see ourselves in the kind of political sphere. So I think this is sort of the hardest type of work that we have to do, and it's very hard to do it actually, but we are mobilizing people to actually get politically engaged. We are also since long time kind of working with the political parties to make sure that we would actually get some places. It doesn't look good still very much. So that's sort of the kind of one type of work. The other one is to influence the political programs. So we did our manifesto. We did a pledge with our members to end racism and build stronger Europe. We get it circulated among our members. We had a lot of signatures, and practically we really want to have the European elections that go against the rising racism, xenophobia, intolerance across the continent. And we also want the parties to support this pledge and publicly to demonstrate they are against it. We were going to all those political parties at the European level negotiations. And we also didn't succeed either here. So only, I think it was the Green Party, which were quite welcoming our thoughts. They were adapting their own political manifestos. But the others, I mean, they invited us, but it was still, they had their kind of plan. And if we would kind of get maybe a footnote somewhere, it would be already a good result. Yeah. So, I mean, we go around these pledges, and now practically what we are planning to do, and it's to work with our members a little bit more further on the campaigning, because of course the campaigning Roma are often being taken as a scapegoat, because if you kind of go against the Roma, you might actually win more votes. So that's what is happening. So we want to monitor the elections. We want to see what the hate speech and the violence in the elections, how it goes, and make sure that this is not happening, but also in the same time to kind of mobilize people. So to actually say why it is important. And if we would not go, we actually would let the racist and the far right to take the place, which might actually make it much worse for us.
Yeah, I mean, clearly in the case of minorities, if I can use that word, it's very difficult to put in place quotas. As we've heard in the case of women who are definitely not a minority. But I think we're more or less equal worldwide, probably a few more women actually, if we look at the global population. But ANL, I'd be interested to hear briefly from you if there is work being done. I mean, I know you focus your work on gender equality and gender balance, but is there more work to be done, for instance, in terms of role models? I mean, we just heard from Gabriela what her influence, her role influenced her family, and so also in terms of role model. And same question to Christian, but very briefly before we open the floor to the room.
Well, I think leadership positions are essential for role models because they inspire women. Now, when you see that the president of the European Parliament is a woman, I think it's a strong signal for all women in Europe. It's also a call for them to go out and vote. And the same for other leadership positions. So in the Parliament, for example, if you look at the committees, so we have 7 presidents who are women of committees and parliamentary subcommittees. And very importantly, again, is the area where the committee activates, because there are some areas which traditionally have been reserved for women, such as health, education, but now it's not necessarily the case. So if you look at these 7 positions of a chair of a parliamentary committee or subcommittee, you find the defense subcommittee, which is led by a woman. You find the internal market, you find also the one in charge of financial affairs. So this is very important, I think.
Mm-hmm. Christian, same thing to you. But I mean, one of the things that we may oppose to this argument is the fact that the public in general is not necessarily aware of this gender balance. For instance, in the Commission, it's perfectly gender balanced. There's a woman at the head of the Commission. How much, I mean, the public may know Ursula von der Leyen, but they may not know about commissioners and their roles and so on. So, you know, the importance, and I'm not focusing only on gender balance, but just on the fact that if we want to be more inclusive, the places where inclusiveness exists need maybe to be better promoted to the public.
Well, I would say that this has been also on the Commission's agenda. I mean, also in the exchanges that the Commission facilitated among member states, including in the high-level event on elections that we had last year, and you, I think, moderated. And well, this is also something that's indirectly recognized in the guide, which I'm bringing back again as a broken record. Sorry for that. And which also, I think, mentions a very interesting project led by the European Disability Forum, which focuses on basically on role models in the communities of persons with disabilities, so to speak. And I would also mention here the recommendations that we adopted last year that also point to the need to support different groups, including women, young people, persons with disabilities, homeless people, and other particular groups in exercising, in fully exercising their electoral rights. And I'm sure that this way of promoting voting rights through role models is a very interesting one and could be further looked into.
Thank you. So do we have questions in the room? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you everyone for your presentations. It's all been really interesting. My question is not specifically to one person, because I would love to just hear in general from everybody. But I think as the panel is about inclusivity and engaging with all citizens, regardless of their identities or where they're coming from or their gender or their abilities or their disabilities, I would like to know what's maybe you do in your daily work to make sure that you're considering how intersectionality comes into play, how there could be barriers due to intersectional identities when it comes to political participation, and just in general, what you do about this. Thank you.
Now that I'm next to you, I'm interested in data. So I know that for some groups it's very, very difficult to have data of participation in elections. But for those groups that you're presenting, basically, can you just tell us whether you have data of the number of people from those groups that voted last elections, and whether there is a way to collect data now for those elections? Because at the end of the day, all those measures sound very nice in brochures, but we are interested in the real impact of it. So we need to be able to measure it somehow. Thank you.
So, who would like to start? I mean, data, clearly, we have heard some from ANL, and we know that Christian's initiative, or the initiative that Christian presented, is a bit too early for an outcome, but maybe Gabriela or Simona, and the first question as well.
I can go. So I will start with the data. Of course, for us, it's very hard to have data because the ethnicity, it's not being covered in the elections, like in the kind of that is not breakdown to the ethnicity. But what we can see, it's sometimes the kind of geographic coverage. And I don't have handy the data from the last elections or European elections, but just an example from Slovakia national elections last year, which actually the mobilization of the Roma segregated localities, which there are like plenty. I think there's like up to 300 excluded localities still at the moment in Slovakia. They actually make the difference in the elections. And it was very interesting to see that it was the only one political party which actually focused very much on campaigning and kind of entering the communities with their programs, with their candidates. And they had quite many Roma candidates, and they achieved to get three Roma to the national parliament in Slovakia out of the four, I think 4 or 5 in total. So there were 2 from one kind of a very successful political party, but from the one which actually didn't have even a prospect to kind of go through the threshold 5%, they made it up to 8, because they reach out and they actually manage to mobilize the Roma. So, and I see that this concrete political party they didn't stop since the national election in, I think it was in November. They going on every weekend. They are in every Friday in different Roma community. And I can really see, and I believe that this political party actually will get quite a lot of seats in the European Parliament, because they really mobilize the people. They were explaining why it's important. And they have also this one-to-one touch with the Roma candidate in the party. So I found it amazing, you know, so it's kind of, we could actually see that this geographic kind of the map showed that from this political party, actually there was this kind of pockets of votes coming from those excluded localities. So I think for us, this is interesting. And also for me, the data, when it comes to, you know, how many chances we are having to actually have Roma on the kind of being elected, and that we cannot rely only on Roma to go out for Roma. It's because we don't even have the percentage very often that we would actually manage to kind of go through. So in the Czech Republic, we make about 2.5% of the population, including the children. I mean, in Slovakia, it's about 10%, so that can make a difference. In Hungary, it's about 6 to 8% of the population. In Romania, it's also 10. In Bulgaria, it will be about 8%. So these numbers also show us that even if everyone would vote, you know, we might actually not can make fully the difference, because there is also like the youngster children, etc. in the data. So it's just like kind of for us to see that we have to actually have the support of the majority of society as well to kind of go there. So we have to go with the mainstream political party, not doing only the Roma agenda, which is also often a problem, and kind of really have the kind of issues that would actually tackle everyone. And I think that's also when it comes like this twisted, like kind of reverse intersectionality. Also to have Roma who would not do only the Roma issues. And of course, in our case, we are also making sure, like with like kind of a strong diversity policy in the organization, making sure that practically we go across all different categories in our work, and making sure, and sometimes it's even quite a work internally, because we have,
sorry, but
we have
like
to make sure that our people, our members are open to this diversity as well.
Simona, what about data collection and intersectionality at the same time?
Well, we do our own research in terms of homelessness data at FANSA, and last year we estimated that almost 900,000 people experience homelessness across Europe on any given night. And you can imagine that from these people, not a high percentage register and are able to vote, because unfortunately, when you lack the safety of a shelter every evening, that is your main priority. At the same time, what we do is, again, through our members, is that they try to support people, empower them, because there is still awareness and people do want to be involved, despite the deep marginalization that they experience and the lack of information that comes with it. There is outreach going on, and there are actions taken in order to bring people out to vote. At the same time, in terms of initiatives that will lead to data, to improve data in general on homelessness, and perhaps on voting participation, electoral participation, we do have ongoing now, since the beginning of this year, reason to hope for better data. And we have a European platform on combating homelessness, where we fans are in charge of several activities, but there is also more work done on counting people who experience homelessness in several member states. There has been a project from the European Parliament where the funding was allocated for data collection. So we do hope to see these results coming out soon and reflecting a more accurate reality on the ground. And from there to take it further and to work towards improved electoral participation, because at the end of the day, supporting people who experience homelessness to be more involved in society in general, the solution is to give people housing. And that's what we struggle and fight for. And when it comes to intersectionality, in our case, of course, it's very relevant because a lot of Roma experience very poor living conditions across Europe, including homelessness. Women are very much affected by homelessness, despite the fact that there is the so-called hidden homelessness phenomenon, which affects more women because they tend to stay away from the public sphere. And we do look at that. In fact, our work is organized thematically. We look at homelessness from a young age, from children to women's homelessness, migrants, families, Roma, and LGBT communities. So we do take in account that aspect.
Thank you. Christian, yes, please. On intersectionality,
Sure.
maybe, or data collection, because you do a lot.
Data collection. The Commission also likes data very much. We're eager to seeing it. We're eager to see it as granular as possible. And I would briefly mention the fact that whilst we do not have we didn't get to measure the impact of the measures that we announced last year, we do have data which is included in our post-election reports. And if you take a look at the Commission's post-elections reports, you can see how detailed this data has become, and that basically, well, this is the result of a, I would say, painstaking process which was facilitated by the European Cooperation Network on Elections, and hopefully would be able to provide more granular data in the next post-election report that we will issue next year. The post-election report will also build on the information provided by member states on the implementation of the recommendation on inclusive and resilient elections, and also on the other measures that I mentioned. I would briefly mention here the practices in member states on collection of data on participation of persons with disabilities. Romania collects data on such participation, and Sweden is another very good example of collecting disaggregated data on participation of persons with disabilities using the criterion of the type of disability. But I would also mention here again the recommendation in terms of intersectionality, which I was saying is the result of a process. It basically accumulates all the knowledge shared in the European Cooperation Network on Elections during the last 5 years. And as I feel this was also, let's say, addressed on a more personal level, I would simply mention that, well, I wasn't at the Commission in 2019, at the 2019 elections, but basically I was on the other side organizing elections. And I could see how this topic developed over time, and how prominent this issue has become on everyone's agenda, including in member states. And I've also been privileged to not monitor, but to witness how many member states changed their legislation during the last years to accommodate the needs of persons with disabilities. And I'm sure this is also a work in progress, and it will not finish here.
Thank you. So ENL, very quick closing word, because data collection is your daily bread, basically.
Yes, indeed. Of course, I like data, but first a few words about the European Parliament and intersectionality, because I think it's fair to say that, at least when it comes to new legislation, the European Parliament is the promoter of intersectionality among the EU institutions. And you see these, if you look, for example, at the proposals on equality bodies to reform existing legislation that will be adopted soon, where the Parliament managed to introduce an amendment on intersectionality. There is something in the proposal on combating gender-based violence. So every time when there is a relevant legislative proposals, there are amendments, and the Parliament has managed to push for it. On data, I mean, gender disaggregated data are essential for research, are essential for us to understand how women think, how women feel about politics. There is Eurobarometer, very comprehensive survey from last year, for example, showing that women and men are similarly likely to vote in the next elections, but there is still a certain gap, let's say between 5 and 10% when it comes to women's interest in European politics, their knowledge of the European Parliament, how much they discuss with friends, for example. There we still find this gap. But I think it would be interesting also to see how women votes, and here you don't have so much data. I found recently, for example, data on Germany, how women vote, for what kind of parties they vote, because the expectation is that women vote, let's say, with those parties that most promote their, an emancipatory women agenda, such as left-wing parties. So in the United States, apparently, there is a big gap between men and women in their support for the Republican versus the Democratic parties. But I looked at Germany, and you see that consistently since the 1950s, more women have voted for the Christian Democrats than men, which is a center-right party, and possibly has to do with the fact that the party has promoted social policies that favor the family. So I think this kind of data for me is very interesting, but we don't have them, in all the member states.
Thank you very much. But I'd like to thank all four of you for your contributions. I know we could have continued, but maybe we can continue the discussion over coffee. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to break for 15 minutes at 11:45 sharp. We're back in the room and we'll continue with our second panel. I usually do is engage in conversation, but I normally would, but it's okay.
Yes, then the microphone.
Okay, good. Okay, but I don't think, could we? Okay, now I hear it, yes. I was not speaking loud, so thank God. Yes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please take your seats back? That's what I was wondering. Thank you. We still have a few people outside. It would be nice if they could come back in so that we can start. Thank you. Could I invite you to take your seats, please, if you're already back in? It's always nicer to have everybody seated before we start the discussion. It's nicer for our speakers as well, rather than having movement around once we start discussing the new theme. While we're waiting, just so that you know, there was a QR code. Could we have the QR code slide back, please? So there's a QR code on the slide. There will be in a minute. Now, there you go. If you could please scan that QR code and answer the question in there. It's just to show where you're listening from and how you're taking part. You have the specifics there: justice, rights, and values. So this is where you should go once you're on the right page. And please answer that little, I don't think it's an actual questionnaire. I think it's just probably one or two questions. So it should be quickly done, but it would be nice if you could do so. It's part of our, cooperation with the Commission. So much appreciated if you take the time to do so. So let's move into our second panel. And we've talked about inclusiveness. Inclusiveness is indeed, or should be, as broad as possible. And we're now going to focus on youth. To explore this discussion, to explore this particular theme, we'll see with our speakers how we can try and make the EU more youth-centered. Clearly, last year was the European Year of Youth, but in fact, it's a little bit, to my mind, like the 8th of March being the Day of Women's Rights. It should be every day, just like every day should be the Day of Youth. They are our future. If we don't include them, we don't help them build what lies ahead, and what lies ahead is for them to live through, not for us, at least not for the ones my age who are, more on the phasing out part of the business world and of our everyday civil society life. So to do so, to discuss that theme a bit further, I'd like to invite our speakers. So please welcome Christophe Pape, who's Senior Policy Officer at the European Youth Forum. Of course, you can climb up there. Otherwise, you're very welcome to take the stairs. Rita Diaz, who's the president of the Erasmus Student Network. Christelle Saval, who's the vice president of JEF Europe. Please do, I understand. And Laurentiu Ploșeanu, who's the vice president of the European Economic and Social Committee. Good morning and welcome to you all. Please take a seat. Yes, I know the seats are a bit close together. So it's a pleasure to have you with us for this second discussion, because as I said, we must all do our best to get young people involved, and we cannot afford to make them feel left out. And unfortunately, many of them still do, particularly when it comes to elections. So how can we ensure that the EU becomes more youth-centered, that the EU continues to build on this whole discussion, or series of discussion that took place last year, in particular, around the European Year of Youth? And I'd like to start with you, Christophe, on that one. What are the main projects that the European Youth Forum is carrying out? And how do you try and work on that inclusiveness?
All right. Thank you for the invitation. Hi, everyone. So for those who might not know the European Youth Forum is a platform of networks of youth organizations. So for example, ES and Jeff are also our members. Through our members, we are representing tens of millions of young people, and we are working on different thematic issues. So for example, democracy, sustainability, youth rights. And I am working mainly on the youth participation component. When it comes to youth participation, it's a very interesting picture right now in Europe. What we see is that there is an increase in youth participation. However, there is a shift from institutionalized participation towards more non-traditional ways of participation. So for example, different boycotts or protests and different ways to express, for young people to express themselves and also their opinion. It is, I think, a misunderstanding that young people are not politically active. They are very active and they do have a lot to say. And for that, we are also trying to create different opportunities for young people to have a say, to be involved in different decision-making processes or policy-making processes. So for example, there is the EU Youth Dialogue, which is the biggest participatory process in Europe and probably also in the world, which also builds on different consultations with young people, and the outcomes are usually present in different policy documents. We also work around the upcoming elections. We had a youth manifesto where we were encouraging the different political groups to have a focus on young people, as young people are not only the future, but they are the present. Young people are present in this room, and also all the decisions that are made today are impacting their lives now, but also in the future. And for that, we are also working, or we were proposing the EU Youth Test, which is now dubbed as the Youth Check. Together with the ESC, the European Economic and Social Committee, we have worked on a version for the ESC. The idea behind the Youth Test that every legislation is checked how they are impacting the life of young people, and not only the traditional youth policy. So it should go beyond education. It should also consider the youth perspective when it comes to sustainability, digitalization, housing, and so on and so forth. We also work, one of our other demands is lowering the voting age to 16. Why young people in many countries, or in many cases, already hold responsibilities and rights at the age of 16, why to exclude them from the participating in the elections and voting? Another very important part of this work, what we are doing for young people, is creating space where civic society can express and represent young people. So we are working with democratic representative structures, and we would like to see them more involved in the work of different institutions, not only selecting random people in, for example, citizen panels, but also strengthen the expertise of those groups that are representing young people and can also express what would be the ideal policies to be developed. This could be also done, for example, in a civil society strategy that is also linked to the Lisbon Treaty, which is calling for a civil dialogue. And I think this is going to be my closing words. What is also important that young people are able to participate in meaningful ways in different political or democratic processes. What does it mean? It's not enough to consult young people. It's also important to feedback how their input has been taken into account, how their opinion is respected by decision makers or policy makers. We see a huge decrease in trust towards democratic institutions. And many of the reasons, or one of the reasons for that, is the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability young people are feeling towards the democratic institutions. And unfortunately, this is also in some cases means that they are being radicalized or they are turning towards extreme solutions.
Thank you very much. Rita, the Erasmus Student Network does promote active citizenship, and one of the ways you do so is through learning mobility. How do you try and get them more involved, and what's the outcome? It should be on, don't worry.
Fantastic. Is there the pointer?
Yes.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. So my name is Rita. I'm the current president of the Erasmus Network, and I'm going to show you a bit what is Erasmus Network. So we are the biggest learning mobility organization. So we are actually part of the Youth Forum as well. But our biggest scope is to promote learning mobility for individuals. We work a lot with the Erasmus Plus program, one of the biggest achievements, like we like to call, of the EU. And we are at the moment present in 45 countries already outside of the European Union. So also trying to support this promotion of active citizenship behind the borders of the higher education area. So we work, this is more or less many organizations we involve and we work. But most importantly, what I wanted to present you today, it's a bit how ESN works and how we listen to the voice of the students. So there are three ways that we do this. One of them is by writing policies, of course, that we always try to put out what will be the better future for Europe with our own words. But most importantly, ESN works with surveys. So we actually ask directly the students, the ones that actually went abroad, had a fantastic experience with Erasmus+. And we listen to them, and by their own words, we try to make policy change together with the actors here in the EU, but also in the national countries. And this is very interesting because we conduct a very big survey 2 in 2 years. It's called the ESN survey. And we closed the survey in August, and actually we collected 23,000 of answers of students. And what the survey shows us is actually very beautiful for our democracy and for the future of European elections. So if it was for the Erasmus students, we actually will be having fantastic results, in my opinion, in the European elections. And you can see here, for example, we asked the students what is their perception to go abroad before they go and after they go abroad. And we can see that after they go and experience mobility, they are not only more citizens of their own country, they are more citizens of the world, but also from Europe and from the EU. So this is actually the catalyst of the program, and actually how it changes the life of international students. And with this, and because in 2019, ESN did a bit of ad hoc initiatives regarding the European elections, we decided for these elections wanted to do something a bit more professional, wanted to engage our network on this topic, and we applied for a grant on the European Parliament that we actually won, and we are implementing this since last year. So this grant actually allows our countries, the 45 countries of ESN, to implement actions regarding how to mobilize young people for the next European elections. Of course, we have started a bit more with the topic of active citizenship, and now in these last months, we are moving more from voting from abroad, and now actually students can vote from abroad, because we know it's not easy. There is many hurdles to go to the embassies, a lot of documents that students need to fulfill, and we have also trying to help the students to have the information in their hands and all in one place. So like I was explaining before, in this start in 2023, and we basically did a needs assessment on what were the barriers for students not to vote in the elections. And then we, since 2024, since this year, we are now more focused on the work regarding specifically the European elections. And what I want to show you here, it's basically the tool. So this tool is available on the Erasmus Generation portal, and it says how the students can vote from abroad from each country. And if you click in the country, you have all the information that you have. So this was our solution to try to provide students with all the information in one place digitally, because what we see, and Christopher also already mentioned this, Students are now moving forward to a less institutionalized way of active citizenship, let's say like this. So they want more information to be available in one place for them. So this is what a way to support them and to be active citizenship in the future.
Thank you very much. Christelle, the Young Federalists have launched the Your Hope campaign. So I'd like to hear a little more about it and what lies behind it and how it works and what is already coming out of it.
So what are the feelings that come to you when you think about the future? So this is something that has been asked in a Eurobarometer, and people were saying, okay, fear, powerlessness, anger, and all of these feelings I can relate to as a young person, and just as a person, is that there's the climate crisis, there's war, there's a lot of negative feelings, and that's normal to see it in survey. But there was one positive feeling, and this positive feeling was hope. So we, in JEF, the Young European Federalists, we decided to put hope in Europe, your hope. So what we did is that we started a massive consultation campaign, that's the first phase, where we asked young people, what do you want to change? How do you want to improve Europe? And there was no topic predetermined, just what do you think we should do to improve Europe? And we got more than 5,000 proposals from every country in the EU, and we got 1.5 million votes on the platform. And out of those votes, we did the Agenda of Hope, and the Agenda of Hope is basically 15 proposals that most people agree with. So it's proposals that really build consensus among young people. And then you can see, of course, climate, there's there with 6 proposals, so very much featured in the Agenda of Hope. And you can see also a lot of topics that are less European-wide as maybe something you would think about. Justice, for example, or health. So you see the impact of the COVID crisis. And in this, the next step was, okay, we talked to political parties, we explained what young people want, and we also discussed how to get there. So for each of the 15 proposals, we did a one-pager, so basically a text of one page, together with civil society to discuss how do we get there? So we actually did one with ESN, but like the question is, those are nice proposals, but very short, right? So how do we get there? What are the obstacles right now to make it happen for young people? So for health, there is not enough competence for health at the European level. So if you want to change that, then you have to reform the treaties. So you need treaty reform at the European level. Now, of course, people don't know about this, and treaty reform is not something you think about in the morning, except when you're like me, president of JEF, and then this is maybe one of your first thoughts in the morning. But what is important is just like, how do we get there? Do we need directive? Do you need national countries to take on this? And then there are proposals you don't always agree with, and also like, how do we find a way forward that suits most people? And then we also had things where people disagreed, and those are divisive ideas. So some of them, as a federalist, made me very sad. Support to Ukraine, LGBTQ, and reproductive rights. There's a lot of things that for me are obvious, that are not obvious for young people. And I think that's also how you see that this was a representative survey. It was not just young federalists answering this across Europe. We actually did a lot of ad campaigns, targeted people to make sure this is actually representative, and the results are statistically significant. So it's also us learning towards the European election. We did it so early in time because we wanted to see what are the divides also in the public opinion among young people. So the third phase of the campaign is actually going to the street, doing civic education, talking to people, and moving forward the ideas of the campaign, of course, the young people's idea. We're now launching the website with also the answers of the political parties on the ideas of the Agenda of Hope and the one-pagers of civil society. But it's just pushing federalist ideas and positive ideas to build the European Union of the future together.
Thank you very much. Vice President Boscianu. Yes, I think our colleague is going to manage. Sorry, I'll just grab the clicker. So there we go. So, Mr. Boscianu, The Economic and Social Committee is organize or does organize an annual event that is called ECAS. So your Europe, your say. And I'd like to hear more about the project, and if you could maybe take us through, the project was only a couple of weeks ago, the annual event was a couple of weeks ago, so maybe you can take us through what happened there and what lies in the pipeline.
First of all, let me express our gratitude for inviting Economic and Social Committee for this event. Thank you very much indeed. Regarding the ECAS, this is our annual youth event, and the first edition took place in 2010. It was a proposal of one of our Greek members of Group 1 by that time, Irini Pari. And in this event, the selected participants have gathered to Brussels to engage in discussions and debates to topical themes of interest addressing their concerns. This year, we have organized the event in a larger context. We had a civil society week approach. That means a sum up of 5 events, which usually are taking place in different moments of the year. That means Civil Society Week, European Citizens Initiative, the Civil Society Prize. This year, the theme has been in the context of the mental health, and a very dedicated seminar for the journalism in the context of the geopolitical exchanges and, of course, in the context of the EU elections. The event is now an established and well-recognized youth event which raises awareness on the functioning of the EU. In the light of the next month's elections, the committee has excited to host on the 6th of March this year's special edition in the context of this first Civil Society Week, with a dedicated focus on reaching out to first-time and young voters. In this context, this year's ECAS addressed a different range of delegates. It was for the first time to address the young voters and the first-time voters in order to raise their awareness. With the team Stand Up for Democracy and Speak Up for Europe, youth priorities for the next EU legislative term, this year ECAS edition brought together over 100 participants with their ages between 18 and 25 from across the EU member states, candidate countries, and also from UK. More than 60 youth organizations and national youth councils from all 27 EU member states, the candidate countries, and the UK have been represented. For the very first time, these participants shared their expectations for the future and proposed impactful recommendations. And the last selected 5 powerful recommendations are the following. First, to create a youth quota for the European Parliament elections. Secondly, to approve the directive for the due diligence to make human rights and environmental considerations mandatory in supply chains and in companies for transparency. Thirdly, to develop a legal framework for social media to mitigate polarization and disinformation. Fourthly, to develop a standardized common strategy on sexual and reproductive rights. And the fifth, a special taxation guidelines for goods and services harmful to climate, like luxury goods, and use money to fund climate-friendly measures. Their proposals will now be handed over to the EU institution and policymakers in order to contribute to the output of our first Civil Society Week and also for our resolution on the upcoming European elections, which shall be subject of a vote of our plenary this week. The 50th edition managed to enhance our committee's role as a channel and also mediator, and offered the opportunity for participants to actively engage in political discourse, enabling them to voice their concerns and aspirations, and thereby strengthening their connection with the European Union. In this line, this event have explored the aspirations, needs, and also expectations of young individuals in anticipation of the newly elected EU Parliament and also future EU leaders. The recommendations are now being considered as a youth panel consultation and will be a distinct active contribution to the overall output of the Civil Society Week. And these findings will also contribute to our resolution. We shall have a second resolution in order to be disseminated with new elected members of the parliament during this summer. And I'm pretty confident about these real substantial contributions from the young participants in our 2 weeks ago, Your Europe, Your Say. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I'd like to have your first reaction, actually, of all three of you, maybe starting with you, Christelle, about these recommendations. I mean, I saw in some of the recommendations, and one of the recommendations in particular was highlighting some of the divisive topics that you mentioned. So how have you received those recommendations? And you know, is that the kind of initiative that you can cooperate with?
Yeah, on the ESC, I think it's very interesting, this strain of youth that you mentioned with the year of youth. And sometimes there's a lot of tokenism, but the ESC actually is doing a great job because they're doing youth rapporteurs on some of the opinions. And I had the chance to be in one of the pilot projects. So I'm involved in the ESC report opinion on the defense of democracy package. And it was really a positive experience. And it's going through the European Youth Forum. And it's really being included as an equal, and I think that's a very important thing. So I really commend the work on the ESC on that, and it's good to see recommendation and also to discuss this. I think with youth inclusion and opinions for youth, of course, it has to come from the youth, but also recognize that I was saying earlier that I have a hard time when people invite me as a youth person, because yes, I happen to be young, I happen to be many things, you know, but this is not who I am. Like, I don't define myself as young, I define myself as a federalist, you know. So I think a lot of youth inclusion is also just making space for young people at the table to speak about the topics they care about, and not to be, I mean, of course I'm in the youth panel right now, but like, I also want to be invited to speak about something else than young people, because this is, to be honest, apart from my personal experience and my experience as helping others being active as young people, I don't have, you know, a lot of youth advocacy. Of course, we follow the European Youth Forum, we do Vote 16, we do ban unpaid internship, etc. But this is not the core of what we do. So I think this is also interesting to take into account when trying to get more people on board. Activism from young people is also topic-based, and then there's other angles than just young people speaking on youth issues.
Rita, what's your take?
Thank you so much. I would like to say what I don't see there, and I really would like to see is the topic on education. I think the topics that were brought up there, they are extremely important and actually align very much with the policies that the EU have been brought it up in the recent years, especially twin transition has been a big focus. But I think we are putting a bit education as a granted measure. I know it's not an exclusive competence of the EU, but education is the base of what we are. From primary school to high school to higher education. And I'm a bit afraid that if we don't continue fighting for education and for people to actually have access to it, and also in our own EU policies for better education and for more access to it, that in the future probably are going to see less people educated and also informed, maybe less young people here in these panels discussing these topics. So the very much tonic that I would like to see the EU putting in defense, I would like also to see in education and the future of the young people on this topic.
Christophe, what makes the participation of young people more meaningful? I mean, such initiatives obviously do, but how can we implement a systematic, almost youth perspective in various policies? I mean, this is one of the things that the forum is working on, as you mentioned in your earlier intervention. So how can we make sure that there is a link there, a more systematic approach?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, there is a bit of a definition of what is a meaningful youth participation. This really means that young people and decision makers are participating in a dialogue on an equal footing. So young people are also informed what is this dialogue about. They are coming with the same set of information. They are co-created the space where they are having the dialogue. And then when or after these consultation happened or this participation activity happened, there is a possibility for young people to follow up the outcomes of this participation. There is a possibility to monitor the impact of this participation. And this is very crucial, that it is not enough to create, I don't know, surveys or different kind of consultations for young people just to fill it out and then forget that they ever participated. It's important that it has to be a very lively connection. And I could even go further. It is not only enough to co-create these, it could be also co-managed. In the Council of Europe realm, there is co-management where young people and decision makers are deciding about, for example, budgetary issues together. And this could be something that can also strengthen the youth participation. What I personally think important is that young people and decision makers have the space to have a dialogue, and not really that young people are coming up with ideas and sending it to decision makers, and then decision makers are going to say no because they were not part of it. So for example, in the EU Youth Dialogue, that is the case is that young people and decision makers are co-drafting recommendations. And also this was the case, for example, in the ESC when the youth test structure was created, and then in the youth test, decision makers and young people are working together on the impact assessment of the decisions. So I think this is crucial because we see that youth panels, for example, when 4 young people are sitting together giving an opinion about what matters for young people is not effective enough. It's important that there is a challenge between the decision makers and young people in order to create meaningful policies as well.
Thank you. Vice President Plășeanu, we just heard from these representatives of youth movements, youth organizations about more meaningful participation, about the work that's done by the committee. How would you like to involve them more? How would you like to help them follow up on the initiatives, on the recommendations that are taken there? I mean, it's not just a tick the box type of exercise. Clearly, there is a follow up to it. So how would you like to see this brought up more? And do you think that maybe ideas like lowering the voting age to 16 is part of the solution, or other ideas of this kind?
Thank you very much for the question. Let me start with an appeal to the previous message about enhancing the education. And of course, education is a base for what we are, but it's much more. It's a foundation what we became. So from this perspective, I believe education is a part. It's a political tool in order to define our position in the next geopolitical context. Regarding the mission of the committee, I would like also to remind you about 2 elements, 2 decisions which have been recently taken. In September 2022, we adopted an opinion which is called the EU Youth Test. There was already a reference on this. A tool designed to strengthen youth participation and youth mainstreaming in policy making based on consultation, impact assessment and mitigation measures, becoming the first EU institution committing to this implementation. And secondly, last July, our Bureau approved a proposal from our new president, Mr. Robke, in order to establish an ad hoc group on youth engagement, which is called ESC Youth Group, and also to launch a pilot project for the implementation of the EU Youth Test in the opinion-making process. And there was also a reference on this in the context of the defense democracy package. We had a hearing, I believe, in February on this topic, and thank you very much for your support. About what we shall do with all these recommendations, my answer will be very concise. All these recommendations after this youth consultation will be communicated directly to all the EU involved institutions, and also try to make links between the recommendations and any upcoming and ongoing opinions, to share them with the relevant rapporteur and to encourage the rapporteurs to get in contact with the youth representatives that attend the EAC, and also to draft these recommendations if they are relevant. And I hope and I believe these 5 selected already priorities for the young generation, we have to admit that they are their priority, and to defend and to promote them in a very persuasive manner. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll open the floor to questions now, because I'm sure there are follow-up questions to this. I mean, I always have 1 or 2 in reserve, but just in case, I think there will be questions to our representatives. Yes, please, sir. The mic's coming your way.
I have a dream. Shouldn't it be useful to appoint a youth commissioner, a young commissioner in the Commission?
Does that deserve any answer? I think. I mean, please.
I shall elaborate a little bit on this. There are plenty of requests in order to have new commissioners. There is a very clear appeal to have a defense one. We, the committee, we are asking to have a commissioner dealing with, let's say, the resilience of the water in EU after our Blue Deal project, which has been launched last year in partnership with the Parliament. In the morning, I was participating in the FIEC, the European Construction Industry meeting, and there was also an intention to ask for a commissioner dealing with all the housing problems which Europe is facing right now. So, of course, the list is open. But, you know, in Shakespeare's approach, a good idea is dying in a bad eye. So we need to find the arguments, not only to claim the need for a commissioner, but we need to put the arguments over there. So I salute and embrace this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. From the European Youth Forum perspective, we would really welcome a commissioner for youth, but also just to add, youth is as a horizontal topic. It should be everywhere. This is also in line with the mainstreaming idea that the youth perspective should be mainstreamed in every policy areas, as every single policy is impacting the life of young people, not only, for example, education. I am not against education before someone would think. I was also working on non-formal education as a portfolio, so very much supporting also the education discussion. But when it comes to, for example, young representatives, I think this is also a very important topic. We also need more young representatives in the Parliament, in the European Parliament. The Youth Forum had a bit of a research, I think 2 years ago, when we found that there are more Martins in the European Parliament than young people under 30. So this is also tells a lot about the age representation of young people in the Parliament. And why do we need more young people in the elected positions? Because they can also bring in the youth perspective in different policy areas. They can also strengthen the strategic foresight, if you like, in terms of how certain policies are going to impact the life of young people in the future. And also, I mean, young people who might have not born yet.
Yeah, we're a little bit back to the discussion we had earlier on about bringing in young people on lists so that they can be promoted and potentially elected. And that's also maybe something that can be worked on at the level of political parties in all of our member states. Do we have other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Very much to everyone. See the great work that you are doing in this regard. And I would like to ask a question based on the reflection that many of us might have in this moment when we think about the new elections, the upcoming new elections, that
Well, the participation rates across the EU is very low, and among young people in particular, but not only. At the Civil Society Week, when we had a meeting with the journalists, they raised this question as well. And I said, even if we have a very pro-European country, like it was the case for Slovakia, at least only 20% going to vote. And saying that we have many solutions to provide information and bring that information closer to young people and anyone that will go to vote to prepare them to this. But still, there is this burnout. There is too much information and no information at the same time. And it's very difficult to navigate for young people, which on Sunday, 9th of June, might be abroad, might be having whatever personal or professional engagements, commitments. How do we get all these people to vote? Do you have a magic solution? And how do we convince them that on the 9th of June, it's very important to vote? How do we bring, because they have vote, but they don't see tangible solution to it through the votes.
Ideas, yes, so everybody wants to answer this. So let's take it in this order, and I think this will be your last intervention. So Christelle, please.
Yes. So on participation, the last Eurobarometer shows that there's actually more people that intend to go voting than 5 years ago, which was already the highest participation since 1994. I remember this because this is the year I was born. This is my memento, people. So there will be higher participation also just because Brexit, because the UK was a large population with a very low participation. So anyway, there will be a higher participation. About youth participation, education is key, and it's very important that there is civic education. Lowering the age to 16 will be mentioned, I'm sure, after me. But it is important that is education brought to people. So people are interested. Like I did door-to-door for the election once, and people, they let you talk to them for a very long while. But they're not interested enough to go and seek this information. And that's okay. But I think the highest danger to democracy now is participation. Because it's not just a European election. When I started in JEF 11 years ago, people were telling me, yeah, like the European Parliament is not legitimate because it has low participation, but now the French Parliament also has it. So it's also not legitimate. So there's a crisis that is more general than the European election. And this is also something we need to think about when we want to reach out to young people. So we need to put a lot on civic education, in non-formal activities, in schools, but also outside of it. We need to put a lot of money on NGOs, basically, and on youth NGOs. They are doing this work, and we need to put it in the curriculum. And Vote 16 is a chance because people are then often in education and can get this peer pressure. They often are at home for the first time they vote, and people that have children have a higher urge to vote to show them the good example than when they don't. So they will also go with their parents. And there's a lot of positive cycles we can create, but it demands a real commitment from politicians.
Thank you. Rita.
Yes, thank you so much for the question, Briken. And it's something that we also been reflecting together, and also with our membership, because we have been seeing also a very shift between generations. So I think my generation still a bit feels connected to our parent generation that was, they didn't vote when, especially the women didn't vote yet, there was no voting rights. So we feel like a bit of this obligation as citizens to do our rights. But I think the next generations after mine, they don't understand anymore why it's important, because they didn't suffer in their skin, let's say, like this urging to go vote. And I think it's like it was mentioned before me, I think it's important to inform people on the right way why it's important to vote again. Even though we are giving 5 steps back, probably we need to give them in order to have a better future for Europe. I think on the ground and actions on the ground, door to door, they are key, because it's where actually the people are going. I really like to speak in these rooms, but actually when I'm on the ground speaking with the students is actually when I see change, direct change to be made. We do have an initiative in ESN that is called Erasmus in Schools. So we do invite international students to go in schools to speak about their experience with local students. So I think this connection between international with the local community can be one of the solutions. But just to finalize my intervention, I think this needs to be done the day after the European elections. So it cannot be done 6 months before. We need to start to practice this active citizenship discussions with the ground, nationally, internationally, from the day one after the European elections, because maybe now it's a bit now too late to convince people that it's important.
Thank you, Rita. Christoph, and then I'll give the final word to Vice President Placiano.
Thank you. So Rita just closed with what I wanted to say. Yes. Yes, but I agree. It's not enough to start now. It also voting is a habit. We don't need to learn this, but it's also important what's happening between two elections. As I mentioned, the youth participation is increasing in Europe, but it's not towards the institutionalized participatory processes. So it's also important to find ways to listen to young people in between the elections, also to create avenues to build on what they are saying and what they are actually voicing, because they are voicing their concerns for quite some time. It's not enough to organize different youth consultations only before the elections. As it was mentioned, it should start right after the elections. So I think this can also highly increase the trust that young people might improve or develop with time, but it's a long process. To rebuild this trust is going to be a very long process. It's not going to happen by the next election.
Mr. Placiano.
I will try to offer you a complementary perspective. There is a researcher in UK. Some years ago, she tried, the name is Norina Hertz, she tried to understand why the people are voting too much on the extreme side. And she discovered that these voters are very much connected with an acute sense of loneliness generated by the pandemic, the huge digitalization, the poly crisis we are facing. This led her to a book which is called The Century of Loneliness, emphasizing the fact that this loneliness is in fact a modern epidemic which is affecting the citizens in their families, in their workplaces, in their societies, almost everywhere. One of the main causes for this is the absence of a sentiment that you are belonging to a project. So, having in mind what Brikena has asked, I believe we can advocate for this understanding. We are part of a powerful project in Europe. Most of the young peoples have been born and have taken this by granted. It's not a deserved prize, but now we need to defend it and to enhance it. So my advocacy should go in this direction, to raise the awareness of the fact that we are belonging to a powerful project, like our parents, like our followers. And I believe this will be part of the success. Let me emphasize you also with a closer look to the December events in Belgrade after the elections, because in the beginning, the Serbian students were not very much involved in the Serbian elections. But when they have observed which is a political reality over there, they have stood up directly in the markets, in the streets. There were tens of students which have been arrested. And now they are playing an important role in the political game over there. The Belgrade elections will be again taken place in June. So I remember once upon a time, an American ambassador leaving the post in Bucharest said, the level of living for the Romanian citizens has not been downgraded so much in order to put them in the position to work. Now I'm trying to speak for the young citizens. The level of their existence is not so much downgraded in order to make them understand why they should vote. But we need to increase this awareness and their deeper reading of the reality and influencing their behavior, political behavior. Remember some years ago, before the Brexit, the British Education Ministry was telling to the students at the beginning of their summer vacancy, if you are not going to work like the Chinese, you are going to work for the Chinese. So if we are not going to vote for the Europeans, we should take into consideration to learn other languages. And one piece of advice, sorry for that, it's a source of inspiration and I'm taking my risks on this. If a youth commissioner will not be appointed, maybe you can organize a youth commission in your organization. And with this commission of the younger people, younger citizens, to react on every political decision of the commission later on. Sorry for discourage.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I think that feeds exactly into what was going to be my concluding word as a communications person, my recommendation to anybody who does any sort of communication. The very, very first question we have to ask ourselves is, what's in it for them? It's the audience we have to bear in mind. How can we talk to them? What can we, rather than threatening, rather than saying, oh, if you don't do that, you're going to have consequences to face and so on. No, we need to really entice people into doing or into listening what we want them to listen to. So this will conclude this panel, and I'd like to thank our speakers very much for their contribution. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this morning. And we'll now move on, and I'll give the floor to Jean Lambert, the chairperson of ECAS.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed to all our panelists today and to all that have contributed to this event. It's always my pleasure as the chair of the ECAS board to present ECAS awards for citizen activity participation. And this year, as you heard earlier, it's about fostering political awareness. And of course, this is a mega election year. Countries covering nearly half the world's population go to the polls this year at various points with various degrees of democracy, I think, involved in those elections. We just had the Russian elections, for example. So in this year, and of course, we then got the European elections running from the 6th to the 9th of June, which I would argue are a rather different level of democracy. And of course, what we're all engaged in is trying to make that as wide, as democratic, as inclusive as possible. So in the award that we're giving today, we've gone for a more comprehensive approach towards the subject than we've sometimes done in awards in the past, where maybe we've picked up a single idea. And our award winner has linked to much of what we have heard today. Now, I'm a former member of the European Parliament, and I'm very used to the question about, yes, well, you're an MEP, but what do you actually do? And that can be quite a difficult question to answer. Once you get past, I'm engaged in sort of legislation, working with citizens, yes, but what does you do? What does it mean? And I've yet to find the perfect answer to that question. And maybe that also is part of the issue that, as you will hear, I'm a UK national. So when we're talking about the value of the project of the European Union and how important that is, it was certainly very clear that in our own referendum in the UK, I think we'd failed to make that connection. We'd failed to remind people why it was so important that we do work across borders on so many of the huge issues that actually face us today. And we saw many column inches and other media reports of willful disinformation, which had real purchase in the public's mind. And part of that was because many people, and I include there a lot of our national politicians and journalists that I thought knew better, we're not willing or able to actually challenge that disinformation. So the toolkits that ECAS have been working on, I think, and again, the work from other organisations is really important there about tackling disinformation. And so we need solutions, and we've been hearing some. And our award winner today for ECAS has certainly gathered together a number of potential solutions. So I'm not giving you the name yet, because this is the equivalent to opening the Oscar envelope. But, you know, we do have a brief video, I'll get out of the way so you can actually see it, explaining a little about the award and our award winner. I'm safe here, yeah, between the screens. So please, if we could roll the video. I would like to invite Amy Poor up onto the platform with me to explain a little about the ideas that she put forward for this. But first of all, I have to do, at school prize giving, this, isn't it? The official presentation of the award. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Let me put that there, and then you can pick it up afterwards.
Okay.
And speak from there, or
It's okay.
take the stage.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for this award. And I'm honored to get this award. And as mentioned in this video, I'm Hava, a social political researcher and a member of the digital inclusion and citizen engagement at Smith in VUB. And regarding the increasing citizen turnout in EU elections, I want to highlight some points. And I think we need to consider some important points. For example, we try to simplify complex decision-making process, and also try to fill the knowledge gap about the EU institution, and the most important one, foster a sense of European identity among diverse cultures, especially marginalized groups, vulnerable groups, migrants, and give them the sense that their voice are important. And I think that we must try to make EU more responsive to its citizens, increase transparency about the process of the decision making, and also leverage technology for wider engagement. And I believe that together we can shape a future where every voice matters, every vote counts, and every citizen feels connected to the EU political system. Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Yes, so now it's my turn deliver the closing words of today's conference. So first of all, thank you very much for your participation. Second, go and vote in June, and not only in June, ever after as well. Convince your family and also your friends to vote. And to do that, maybe we at ECAS have some tools at your disposal, which are either ready or will be really, really ready in the next couple of days. So one of them is this series of podcasts that we already have in place, right, Marta? So actually you can use it in your campaigns or in your advocacy for voting. Then most probably, do we have the app? No, I can just say about the app. Or? So those are the first democracy toolkits, okay? And then the app. So what we have been doing in the last 2 years, so now we have packaged it together, is an application which provides information about the modalities of voting in each and every member state in all EU languages. When to vote, how to register, where to go and do that, what are the specificities about EU mobile citizens who are residing in another country rather than the country of origin, if they want to vote in their hosting country. So this app is almost there. We were really dreaming of launching it today, but it will take a couple of more days. So just really keep an eye on it and, of course, use it also in your outreach to citizens and your target groups. On this positive note, we have a lunch waiting us outside, so don't leave. Let's have some nice conversation and networking while also enjoying what ECAS has cooked for you. Goodbye.